Modern life requires an enormous amount of moral fatigue. Every day, we suppress our raw, authentic desires to adhere to the rigid rules of society. We smile at slights, swallow our anger, and follow the geometry of the crowd. When this mounting pressure of conformity snaps, we look directly into the dark for relief. Psychological data supports this shift. Statistics show that modern audiences often feel a quiet frustration with static, rule-bound heroes. Their primary function is to uphold a status quo that the viewer knows to be flawed. Villains command total attention by executing brutal, internally logical choices. They do the things we are too heavily conditioned to even consider. To understand this fascination, we will map the clinical psychology of the antagonist, exploring the biological reasons human beings crave cinematic darkness. This psychological autopsy ranges from the mindless conformity of the henchman to the precise, chilling calculations of the mastermind. It begins with a single question: how does a human mind first cross the boundary of standard morality to justify the completely unjustifiable? The descent into villainy typically begins as a statistically logical response to severe systemic trauma and societal abandonment. The mind employs a defense mechanism called reframing to survive. The traumatized individual avoids reality by recasting their own aggression as protection and harm to others as a necessary sacrifice. This constant reframing expands the psychological boundaries of acceptable action until horrific acts become standard operating procedure. Carl Jung identified the foundational concept for this dual nature, the shadow. Jung defined the shadow as the repressed, unacknowledged qualities of the human psyche. We hide these traits to fit into society, leaving only the conscious self visible. Hidden beneath the surface is a massive volume of dark desires and impulses lurking below our normal behavior. The cinematic villain acts as an external proxy. They allow us to safely enact these repressed desires on screen without risking our real-world social standing. Trauma creates a fragmented psyche that uses villainy as a mechanism to externalize its inner turmoil onto the world. Humans protect their self-image through the self-positivity bias. We are biologically compelled to believe we are good people. When we encounter real-world people who share our negative traits, this bias causes cognitive dissonance. We distance ourselves from them to protect our own sense of moral integrity. Fictional villains bypass this biological defense because the scream acts as a safety barrier. A study from Northwestern University on implicit egotism proves that we actively align with fictional darkness. The findings show that fans of villains are mathematically twice as likely to identify with selfish, dishonest, or manipulative traits compared to fans of heroes. This is the broken mirror theory. Because the villain isn't real, we can look into their fractured reflection and explore our own dark traits without our ego interpreting it as a threat. We crave the villain's absolute freedom from the crippling weight of societal guilt and cognitive dissonance. This absolute freedom from the weight of guilt is entirely powered by a clinical architecture known as the Dark Triad. The first pillar is narcissism, an inflated sense of self-importance combined with an absolute refusal to submit to perceived tyranny. The second pillar is Machiavellianism, the strategic, instrumental use of manipulation to achieve a desired hyperorder, devoid of moral constraints. The third pillar is psychopathy, characterized by an extreme lack of empathy, high impulsivity, and total immunity to societal shame. When these three traits fuse, they eradicate the superego. This leaves behind a highly effective engine for achieving goals without the interference of conscience. While an average person might fail due to empathetic hesitation, the triad mind succeeds through cold, mathematical efficiency. Think of a time a cinematic villain's logic made uncomfortable sense to you. Describe that reasoning in the comments below. While the Dark Triad creates formidable leaders, a leader is powerless without followers. This sets the stage for the psychology of the henchman. Henchmen are a terrifying psychological symptom of mass behavior rather than mere cinematic muscle. History shows that ordinary people will willingly commit atrocities to avoid the exhausting burden of moral choice. This is the banality of evil. Following a Dark Triad leader provides psychological comfort. It outsources agency and replaces paralyzing societal uncertainty with crystal clear direction. Higher up the hierarchy, we find a different typology, the clinical mastermind. The mastermind seeks a sterile, mathematically perfect hyperorder. They are driven entirely by Machiavellianism. The profound terror of the mastermind comes from their flawless internal consistency. They expose the fragility and hypocrisy of human emotion. Mastermind logic scales to real-world devastation when broken systems fail and desperate populations demand absolute solutions. In this grand equation for universal balance, the mastermind views individual human lives merely as abstract data points. We gravitate toward this archetype because it represents our own dark desire for absolute control in an unpredictable world. The philosophical antithesis to the mastermind is the chaotic jester, or anarchist, who is driven by high impulsivity psychopathy. The anarchist utilizes the sad clown paradox to mask profound trauma with manic destruction. The anarchist acts as a chemical solvent. They melt down the hypocrisy of institutions to prove that societal order is a fragile illusion. The mastermind ruthlessly rules the spectacle of society, while the anarchist wants to laugh while burning that spectacle to the ground. Immersing oneself in the anarchist's worldview carries a psychological risk. It can permanently destabilize the viewer's own moral identity. A cinematic story is a closed psychological ecosystem where the hero and villain represent two warring halves of a single human mind. The villain's clinical purpose is integration, forcing the hero to confront their own shadow to achieve true individuation and wholeness. We love villains because their darkness is the only mechanism powerful enough to force us into the light of absolute